and his latest book was To the Ramparts. I want to thank Rob for joining us. To the Ramparts, How Bush and Obama Paved the Way for Trump. We're now joined by Danny Glover, actor and activist. Danny, good to have you with us.
Thank you very much.
Well, always great to have you with us. So you've heard some of the conversation, I take it, so I want to kind of leap in here with a question for you, knowing you just got back to the country, but you're very aware of what's going on around us. One of the things, there's a subtext here, of some of the conversations we've been having around this panel. And part of that subtext has to do with both class and race. Thomas Frank raised the issue of populism in this country. The populist movements that have taken place. One of the things that killed populist movements was race in this country and racism. We're seeing this rise of racists taking power all over the country, especially through Trump and certain members of the Republican Party. So I want to hear your analysis of where you think that takes us. Where are we?
The whole idea of populism is, you can go all the way back to the Bacon Rebellion in 1679, where blacks and indigent servants, poor white landless workers, people got together and had a rebellion. And that was a populist rebellion. We think about the Eugene Debs running for president in 1918 from prison. And we think about the populist movements, which you don't talk about at the end of the 19th century as well. So the idea that it's tradition, is part of the tradition of this country, and this sense of its own radicalism as well. When I think about that now, it's hard to tell, what place we are in. I know not only Americans were looking forward to this election as more came to vote. There were something like 257 women on the ballot, more women on the ballot than ever before. You had people of Muslim descent on the ballot. You had people who were Palestinian on the ballot. You had this extraordinary moment right now, and I think there has to be right now a feeling of some sense of disappointment at the outcome as we look at the outcome now. Now, this is not only, I think, important for us to understand domestically and everything else, but imagine what impact the election had on the people of Latin America, who just saw a fascist become the president of Brazil, in Bolsonaro. Or think about what is happening in Venezuela, where the attack on Venezuela, as well as Cuba, as well as Nicaragua, more sanctions on this. So you would hope that whatever we did here would in some at least halt the move to fascism, or move to the right. Let me use not fascism, but to right, would in some sense, what we do here would embolden, if we had done dramatically well, would embolden the people who are in those countries in Latin America and other places in the world who are waiting to see what we do. I mean, the world is waiting to see what we do. And to some extent, for whatever reason, whether it was the conflicts inside of the Democratic Party and the struggle to who's going to control the party, or the centrists going to control the party, or the populists, or the young progressives who are going to control the party, who move somewhat marginally to the left or whatever. But I think we have some real questions to ask ourselves right now, because it was important to get the House back. If we hadn't got the House back, that'd have been really drastic, dramatically ugly. But it's important to get the House back, even by the slim margins that we have. But mind you, there's still the issues on the table about war, still the issues on the table about climate change. Is the Democratic Congress now going to change that narrative and that conversation about those particular things? Those still is issues that are right there and in front of us.
So one of the things that just came over the transom here that I think is important to talk about, because it talks about what the divide means, and the complexities of how things, the intersection of what happens, race, class, and also how we view the world socially, right? So there was a referendum in West Virginia. The referendum in West Virginia, the state constitution, they passed it, 51.6% said yes, that the state constitution is amended to say that women's right to abortion is not protected in West Virginia, which leads the way for the West Virginia legislature to pass a law banning abortions in West Virginia. So, America is a complex place when it comes to our politics, because we're one of the most heterogeneous nations on the planet Earth, and all the complex history that we have in this country. So this law is paving the way for something very dangerous that could happen to women in this country, passing West Virginia, being pushed by Trump and pushed by the Senate. So, I mean, so again, this adds another element to how we analyze what this election means and where this might take us.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a major element, and I think this is, I mean, you know, the whole reason you pass something like this is to get it to the Supreme Court, to get them to consider the question.
Right.
It's the same thing we're seeing with all these fetal heartbeat bills, and really the entire strategy over the past few years of the anti-abortion rights movement is either to try to kill it outright, obviously, by sending a case like West Virginia, or I think equally as ominous, even though it's less talked about, defining down the issue and sort of the time of the viability of the fetus to make abortion effectively illegal in so many different places. And I think it's part of a complex legal strategy we've seen that the Republicans have engaged in, or the anti-abortion movement really, for the past 5 or 6 years. And it's really starting to bear fruit here, I think, with not only the ascension of all these different judges, but I think what we've seen at the state legislature level, which again, to go back to the gerrymandering issue, I think we have to actually consider the fact that huge swaths of the country were just given up by the Democrats. The progressive people there, all the people there, we can never reach them, we can never talk to them, it makes no sense at all. And this is, you know, I mean, it's not what you get per se, but it's a big part of what you get when you look at that kind of strategy over the...
Or when, another way of saying it, when your movement dies. West Virginia was not just a Democratic state when I was a child, but a profoundly Democratic state. And now it's, you know, went for Trump by some enormous percentage. It is, and it's because why was West Virginia a Democratic state? Because of organized labor, because those people were, you know, it's a working class state, it's a poor state, and that this should happen to them, it's just it's so shocking, and it's a microcosm of what has happened to the Democratic Party in so many ways. But hey, they won Orange County. You know? They won. They're doing well in Johnson County, the county in Kansas where I grew up. But yeah, it's astonishing.
Well, the racial demographics is a change. Racial demographics is changing in Orange County. They're not the Orange County that we thought about during the Reagan terms and Reagan years. It looks different than it did then. And so I think you have to take that in consideration too. How much of that is being because of the mobilization that the Democratic Party did, or whether people were dealing with right across, not far from their borders, the issue of immigration, and maybe that had an impact on that, what happened as well. But California is at the same time is an unusual state itself, as we all know. I mean, even now, the discussion right here, and I don't know the outcome of the election with Javanka Beckles, who's running for the Assembly District of 15. And what that outcome means, there's a fight between the moderate Democrats and those who are progressive. I mean, and the candidate has none of the qualifications that candidate Beckles has, you know, and yet the centralist Democratic Party put all this weight behind that candidate. And so I think I don't know. I don't think maybe this struggle within the Democratic Party about who's going to control the Democratic Party is one of the key elements that really left us in the situation that we are right now, you know, and where the resources went to and who the resources went to. Now, like I said, it's great that we were able to, the Democratic Party was able to recapture the House. but there were great expectations in that. When you look at Georgia and what happened in Georgia and everything else, and you look at it in relationship to the cleansing of the voting polls, voting rolls, and everything else, and all the other things that had happened, and the racist tactics uses, the racist tactics of fear. You know, fear has been the trump card for Trump himself all along, and he used that. And you can't underestimate the impact that that's had on this what has occurred tonight as well.
Mr. President, let me just say thank you to Thomas Frank on his way out. Good to have you with us, Thomas. Thank you, glad you could join us.
Yeah, so I actually want to tie the populist dynamic, that first populist moment, to the dynamic in West Virginia. So I think you're absolutely right, but there's something else going on. So we've got these populations. One of the things that's complex about human beings in general, much less Americans, is we all have different identities. I'm a dad, I'm a professor, I'm an African American, I'm a man, et cetera, et cetera. The question is, politically, often it's like, what aspects of those identities can you actually speak to? Can you get people to move on? So one way to read that West Virginia, alongside what Thomas was talking about before he jetted, is that what the right has been able to effectively do time after time at the local, the state, and the national level is get people to think about themselves primarily in cultural terms. Right? So if you think back to that populist moment in the 1890s, there were three dynamics that actually killed the People's Party. One dynamic was concentrated corporate power, and they controlled the state. The second dynamic was that whites and blacks just couldn't kind of see, they just couldn't see eye to eye, because whites actually were, and this connects to the third dynamic, whites were able to, elites consistently articulated a message that made whites think of themselves first and foremost as whites in an interclass alliance, as opposed to that other message where they could have thought of themselves as being in the same class alongside blacks. So that's the way to read that West Virginia dynamic. And we're going to see that increasingly, whether it's about immigration, whether it's about abortion rights, whether it's about a range of other cultural issues. The question is can some combination of progressive forces articulate a similar set of policies using a similar set of ballot initiatives that can get people to see themselves as something broader than simply being white?
And Danny Glover, before you have to roll, do you want to have a thought here?
I'm sorry?
Before you have to go, do you want to jump in with another thought?
Well, I think when we look at historically, I mean, we're right. We know all the points. We know all the points where the struggles have been struggles that we were able to find common ground. Poor white people and blacks and other minorities were able to find some sort of common ground. But you also, the other elements that we often live in, that what brought people together in the 19th century and maybe the early part of the 20th century are not the dynamics that bring people together in the 21st century, because we have something else, and that is a system that provides some sort of advantage, and that advantage is to be a consumer in the system itself. And I think that, in a sense, more than any place else, has fractured whatever possible relationship we have. We look at the end of World War II and an incredible progressive legislative and that brought African Americans into the labor force, the primary labor force. We look at that, and then we see the expulsion of members of the CIO, of 1 million members of the CIO in 1949. We see the de-radicalization that had brought about the changes. Radicalization had brought about the changes that we were able to embrace and realize, I'm thinking now, just as myself, 50 years after the strike at San Francisco State, my alma mater, where we're able to struggle, go on strike, and bring about the first school of ethnic studies in any major college in the United States. And yet at the same time, that moment came at a particular moment where we saw rebellion that was happening not only in the United States, but in other places in the world, not only in the public space after King's assassination with revolts, but also on college campuses as well. That kind of radicalism is the kind of radicalism you need. That kind of engagement, civic engagement as citizens is what we need at this particular point in time.
Reverend, I know you have to run, but it's always great to have you with us. I really appreciate you taking time.
Thank you.
Good to have you here. And we just got another announcement.